Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty, and this is the Balance Manifesto for Path of Exile 3.19 Lake of Kalandra. Now, I'm not going to really sugarcoat it. Roughly 85% of what we're about to briefly go over and read to you is negative and is basically a worse iteration of the game than the previous two patches. So, if you're not interested in basically the last two leagues, but worse. Granted, they could add new skill gems, and the league mechanic itself could be the greatest thing since, sliced bread. If you're not interested in basically the game being worse going forward, I would suggest, I'll give you 5 seconds now to walk away and just come back in 3 months. Okay, so if you're here, you want to wade through the shit with me. So, I basically broke this up in my own little note section in a couple of brief categories here, and those brief categories are as such: defense, minions, skills, and then items and others, because those are the main categories in which things were effectively nerfed here. So you'll see the long version on the left, and again, I'm just going to briefly go over things, and of course there will be very minor things, or even some things I've left out, and that's fine. There's a lot to read here, and again, this is just a preliminary. Don't have patch notes yet. So, spell suppression, there is less on gear and more on tree, but the value should be allegedly the same. It just requires more investment. So what this is basically reading as for spell suppression is you'll definitely be able to still reach 100%, but you're going to have to put some more passive points in. So which is overall worse because it's more investment for the exact same values as last league. Arctic Armor got buffed. It's more mitigation while stationary. Then again, being stationary, you're probably dead either way, so kind of a moot point. Flesh and Stone got buffed, more mitigation in general, so that's good if you're using Flesh and Stone. If not, doesn't really matter. Defiance Banner was massively nerfed, so it's 50% worse in what I believe is every conceivable way. So this is just worse. I would probably say not use Defiance Banner going forward, but you still might have to because, the enemy's not getting any weaker. So Wind Dancer, the Keystone, which was like the Kintsugi type thing, and Arrow Dancing were both buffed, but the buffs themselves were like very niche and mostly worthless. That's what I put for here, and the reason I meant that is because like the change, to having your evasion rating doubled against projectiles, but then you have less evasion against melee. Well, it's kind of the same thing. And then for Wind Dancer no longer having the drawback and the more evasion, but now having a 10% more chance to evade, still seems, again, kind of like just still shit, but doesn't really, it doesn't seem that appetizing, so that's fine. Grasping Mail just is worse. If you have existing ones, they're fine, but yeah, Grasping Mail went from 100% increased defenses to 50%. This was previously really only gotten from trading in a full set of breach rings. Still can. It's still pretty okay. But yeah, the annoying part is the Gravicious Veiled mod. So previously this gave 12 to 14%. Life is ES. Now it's changed to 9% Fizz is taken as Cold Lightning Fire across the board. I think I'd rather have the 12 to 14, so to me that seems like still kind of worse, but might have a niche better usage. Again, just one prevents actual damage as a buffer, one prevents only one type, so I'd rather have the one that prevents all types. Yeah, blind is undervalued in general. 10% more effective blind on tree kind of seems like a whatever type thing. Mind Over Matter is now 40%, but they're not buffing any of the peripheral things. So like Mind Over Matter going to 30% to 40 is cool, and then them nerfing all other Mind Over Matter type things across the board aside from it. But they don't really have like the infrastructure for Mom to be good again, like the mana values, that sort of stuff. So I can't imagine that's really super strong. One note I put here, Fortification is easier to gain and longer lasting, but it was already pretty much permanent for most builds. That seemed like a whatever thing. As the end of the nerfs came in, I was very surprised. There's just no determination nerf. So this was an interesting one, because to me that was like public enemy #1, since determination was being used by like almost 90% of the players. And the only reason I assume it didn't get nerfed is because A, they nerfed Defiance Banner, and B, I don't think they know what to do. So, long story short, I don't think there was any quick fix that they thought would be remotely well received, so they just did nothing because they couldn't fix the problem, so they did nothing. That's my thoughts there. That's part 1 done. Part 2, Minions. Now, this is like the biggest 1-2 left hook I've ever seen in verbiage history. Fun one here. The problem, there are limited options to invest in Minion-related stats on player gear. So they're saying the base stats have been inflated to compensate, and it means that Minions care too little about itemization, which again is so out of whack. To say that Minions do not care about itemization, I mean the Minions themselves, but the builds are not derived strictly from scaling Minion damage. Large portion of it is that a Minion build has to rely on 60 to points on the tree that has nothing to do with the word Minion revolved around them, and then your gear is getting the things like defenses, itemization from stats, and mitigation. So that's what the build is. The tree is Minion related, but the gear is not, therefore that is now a problem, I guess. So their solution, funnily enough, is to basically nerf 85% of Minion builds. Quite drastically in some cases. So let's go through how they did that. So they've roughly nerfed Minion life damage and overall stat scaling by what seems to be about 10%. And they've compensated this by adding new Minion items and implicits. There's a ring, they've changed the values on helms, and wands that introduced a stepping stone wand for Minion scaling, of which we do not know the specifics. So that's the thing. Absolution was nerfed, I believe, basically they nerfed it in the beginning and in the mid-tier, and then they buffed it endgame. That was the big Absolution thing. So its damage scaling in the endgame went from 180% effectiveness, which was 100. So it's a pretty big buff there. Absolution still pretty mediocre, a little bit of crit. Animate Guardian got buffed damage, which is like what? The next one's strange. Animate Weapon cost more mana? So it previously cost 12 and now it costs 16. I don't know why they decided to nerf the mana cost of Animate Weapon, but they did. They super nerfed Articali's Fang by its poison duration was halved. That's brutal for a thing like poison and infinitely stacking dot. The duration does matter, and it lost 10% fizz damage. They do gain a little bit more damage per spider, but that's the player damage, not the spider damage, so it's kind of strange there. Herald of Agony got a very minor attack speed increase per virulence stack. Herald of Purity got a pretty big buff, the damage duration AoE. Phantasms gain damage. Every golem seems to have his life buffed or equalized to be the same, but Chaos and Fire got buffed in like every single way, possibly viable as actual golem builds. Sad because I just left a league when I was playing Fire Flame Golems, but yeah. And Ice Golem got buffed a little bit. Holy Relics damage was giga buffed, so that went from, now has 250% damage effectiveness at all gen levels. Previously, it was 146 at the top end, 70 at 1. So it's a huge buff to Holy Relic. Very interesting. Also, 50% more life regen to the allies through all levels. So Holy Relic with the Joffrey's helms, you can have 2 Holy Relics. Could be pretty cool because you could use this with Herald of Agony pretty much for free, or you could use this and Cyclone with like something like Herald of Purity. So very cool to see Holy Relic there. SRS got buffed. Reaper got nerfed, which saying that out loud is banana sounding. They buffed the buff that Reaper gets for consuming, which is by far the worst part of Reaper. That's the one that you really wouldn't even bother activating half the time aside from Val's summon skeletons. But the slash went from 250% effectiveness down to 150. They totally nerfed it, which is crazy. Skeletons got giga nerfed. Skeletal mages even more so. And then there's Veranda's March had something with the boots from Expedition. But that's whatever. So the way that they kind of rectified this is they allegedly. So after all the changes to scaling, minions will now deal approximately twice as much poison damage, 3.5 times as much ignite, and 7 times the bleed. Now, but those numbers are multiplied based off of what will be their new base values of damage, which could be severely nerfed. So we don't know if this is actually going to even equal more damage for dot-based minions, or it could still be nerfed, especially when you have the following thing, which means minion now gain the same bonuses from charges as players do, compared to the significantly elevated bonuses that other minions gain, which means that they are nerfed. Anytime a minion had a charge, it is now way worse, and that sucks. Minion crit is also slightly better, but again, we don't really know the values in which that'll be better. The one thing I kind of like is they have the minions AoE, the mastery, is replacing the crit one, which is more universal, but yeah, that's, and all this again is even more and more worse because Necro lost its +2 gems, but now gained in Holy Might, which is 30% Fizz as Chaos, which is not going to affect like half the minion builds. So this is like, you're basically segregating what the minion builds can benefit from. If you're not playing, you're playing something like, I don't know, whatever, Flame Golem, you would never play Necro now because you just lost 2 gem levels. It gaining Unholy Might is pointless. So this might be beneficial to some people, but overall this is a massive nerf to the bulk of minions. I don't understand why the fuck they're nerfing minions, which wasn't even a top 10 like archetype, I don't even think, in the game, because minions might scale okay in the early and mid game, even if most of them really don't, but they just got like obliterated. So we'll have to see if there's new scales, new patch. Again, everything's previewed in patch notes, but at first glance they just fucking like took minions out back and shot them in the head for, again, like 80% of minion builds I think will be worse, the ones that of the field performing, because a lot of those were skeletons, a lot of those were certain golems that basically now have reduced stats and did not get buffed, therefore they got nerfed, right? So moving forward, skills, there wasn't a whole lot that I was super impressed with as far as that I cared about, but undeniably Detonate Dead lost a mass amount of damage. Someone was kind of to do the math on Reddit with the new formulas. Long story short, the base damage, if you were doing represented numbers, went down by like 45%, which is brutal. Fire Trap also got a massive decrease in damage, 20%-ish, 25%-ish loss of damage from the dot of Fire Trap. So I guess RF kind of got nerfed if you're using Fire Trap. Subsequently, any traps that had cooldowns were attempted to be rectified by increasing their base damage, but the CDR increase means it's going to be just worse overall. Like, it's slightly higher damage, but you're casting way less traps because you're losing a lot of the cooldown reduction. So things like Seismic. Again, these things are targeted towards specific builds like Seismic, but are now hitting things like Flamethrower and Lightning Spire, which were offending no one. Explosive Arrow. Its dot damage has been reduced by 40% because the damage per charge with ailments per target went from 5 to 3, which is a 40% reduction. But the base damage seems to have gone up. So if you care about the base damage EA, but versus the dot EA seems to be significantly worse. Cast on Death has lost half its damage, basically. The buff that was 304 went down to 152. There's a half a more multiplier from Cast on Death. Gone. Ward Loop lost 39% damage, 27 negative, up to 6 more. Reversed, so it's now 39% loss of damage on Ward Loop. Still probably viable, but that's annoying. Also the quality's changed, so the crit's worse, and then, yeah. It's just not great. The Blessing skills are no longer supported by life taps. You can't really do the March of the Legion free blessing by doing that whole thing where you click a skill with life tap to allocate it temporarily. That's seemingly got dunked on, so unfortunate there. Sniper's Mark, I'm sure I'm missing something. Sniper's Mark lost all its flask stuff. Flask and life and mana, gone. Bummer. Hydrosphere can only be hit by the entity that cast it, which is just a minor thing. So here are the buffs. So that was all the nerfs. Well, maybe there's more. Oh, actually, there's more nerfs. Let's actually just do the nerfs first, then we'll come back to the buffs so we can end on a high note. But that high note is very low. So Juggernaut got slightly buffed. In some cases, it actually might be considered nerfed, but I think it got slightly buffed. So, yes. Trickster is somehow getting buffed. We don't know how. That is what it is. They added a new notable to Juggernaut also, which is kind of cool. Chieftain's Chosen, the slam thing, damage doubled, cool. Pathfinder got giga nerfed, okay? So Pathfinder lost 6% Ellie reduction, and it lost 20% chance to free Shocking Knight. However, if you're playing Pathfinder as a Mage Blood build, it has been increased by 20%. You gain 20% skill effect for Magic Utility Flask. So that is about that. Omniscience has been nerfed. However, they have not increased the drop rate. So, big fuck you. However, the change to Omniscience, which is one that myself and other members of my Twitch team, Team Plus One, like Leggy, Manny, Iron, etc., this is something we all suggested, which is just make the 10 of 15 an Omni, and it really won't change shit. It'll still be extremely good, but it's still a 1% or 2% drop rate. So that's really disappointing. They could have easily made it a 5 or 8% drop rate and done this, and it would have been way better for the community. But they chose not to. So here we are. Melding in the Flesh now comes with a -6 max all res, which is fucking brutal. It still can be really good, but very hard to reach like good values because it's instantly going to counteract things like Aegis Aurora or any sort of buff. You're going to have to really invest significantly more now to get the most value out of that, so that kind of sucks. And Brittle got giga dunked on. Your 15% base crit's now down to 6%. And honestly, this is the worst change of all, I think. These next two, for me, as far as like fucking everyone over. The mana reservation that was on the masteries, that's gone. Life reservation on masteries is nerfed, and the aura effect has been nerfed. But the reservation just being removed is absolutely disgusting, because that's doing nothing but shitting on the vast majority of players who can't afford to get real gear, don't have the time to, or it's really just bad. It's just bad design. It just feels bad as bad. And then they nerfed the flasks, the life flasks, the flagellants that get your charges back. It's been less than halved, so that's depressing. Jules can now roll recoup, and Chainbreaker got reworked. That's a thing also. But let's go back to the buffs. That's all the sad shit out of the way. Okay, it's all, now we're on to buffs. That was a lot of talking, a lot of nerfs. Here's the positive part. It's just this, by the way. Nothing else has really been buffed but this year. And it is depressing. I want to read out this next part here because I think it's really funny. Due to past evolution, there are sometimes skill and supports that are left feeling underwhelming. That's the problem. What they're really just peppering and sugarcoating is saying that there is a massive gap between what skills are good and what skills are bad. And there's a lot of skills that gap is a mile wide. It's a Grand Canyon of a gap of what's good and what's bad in Path. This is their attempt to make these things, these underperforming, underwhelming skills, more attractive options, better. This is like the saddest sack of buffs that you'll ever see. So we have things like, 7% more damage. Blazing Salvo got 5% more damage. Cleave got 2 more range. Okay, Crackling Lance got 2 more range. Decoy Totem has more life. Okay, I'm not even going to continue reading them because they're all honestly basically the same speed of buffs. The biggest one I saw was Sunder being buffed. And it looks like it's going to go back to old Sunder kind of because the waves travel faster, but it won't be remotely as good. But that's it. There's nothing else. That's all we got for the Manifesto. I would say if you didn't like the last 2 leagues in Path, and when the week announcement goes out in a week, and there's no enticing new gems, or this league doesn't super grab your attention, skip it. This is probably going to go down as yet again, unless this league is gangbusters, and they're going to add new gems, and Trickster becomes the best thing known to man. This is going to be one of the biggest and most disappointing patch errors in Path in recent times, which I think for me is like 3 or 4 leagues in a row here of just shitting the bed. So it's very depressing. So if you break down the numbers, again, 85 to 90% of all these things we've discussed here are nerfs. There is really no silver lining. You saw the buff section. It's extremely minor. That's what we have to go with so far. That's the Balanced Manifesto. If you have anything else you want to say or put forth, I'll read it in the comments below. Hope you have a good time, and I'll catch you in the patch notes for the next type of news-esque video. But fingers crossed for something redeeming, because as of right now, this is a big old shit sandwich.